Hello out there, and guys, you can probably tell from the title of this video that I have a problem with D2. And the problem is that it has just been excellent. Excellent to work with, excellent performing. This stuff just goes and goes and goes. And this was supposed to be the end of the D2 testing video where I splice in a lot of footage and show you how these knives wear down and have an eventual winner. And the problem with that is that all of these knives, most of them at least, are outlasting the media that I have. You know, I've gone through almost all my cardboard. I had, tons of footage, just tons of stuff that if I spliced it all together and posted it, it would be more of a mini series, like a 10-hour mini series versus a quick video going through some testing, and I don't want that. Hopefully you don't want to watch that much footage. And so what I'm going to do today is just go through my initial analysis of how everything is worn down and how it's all performed. And yeah, I am eventually going to finish the test and have a winner, but I mean, this stuff takes time, and a lot of these knives are just showing no sign of slowing down. Now, I do have to tell you a couple things when it comes to the variables and, the different elements that are in play here. And one of them really could be how good a job Jeff Jewell did sharpening them. And that's one thing that I didn't think about until I was in the middle of the test, is that, these edges that I started with are probably significantly better than what you would get out of the factory. He put a lot of time into each one. And so my guess is that these knives, each of them is performing at a level that is basically the max potential for that knife. We do have different inclusive angles, and I have this paper here again, and I will put that information down in the description box if you're interested in that. But yeah, it's something to keep in mind that, I wanted to get an expert sharpening, on each of these knives, but it's not necessarily what you should expect coming from the factory. Or it might be, I don't know. That's one of those things that I can't really measure. Another thing to keep in mind with all the variables here is that the longer a test goes, the more those variables impact the accuracy of the results. For example, if I had, one simple round of cutting cardboard, 10 pieces of cardboard, and at the end of that 10 cardboard, cutting test, I had some knives that were not functioning on the same level, you could be fairly certain that there weren't enough variables to impact that, and the knife was actually just not performing well. But over the extensive amount of testing that has been done, so many little, little nuances can occur. So many little things with dirt getting into to a specific cut, or certain aspects can take place that just alter your accuracy. And so I don't think it's going to be fair at any point to say, oh, this knife is eliminated, or this knife didn't do well, so it's not a good knife. I think if you're looking at it that way, you are probably missing the point. I think if you are trying to pull something from the results that I've seen, that it needs to be something more general. And so I'm going to try to keep my analysis of this general. All right, so let's start with the three knives that are actually eliminated from the competition at this point. And I mean, we've gone through over a half dozen rounds and hundreds of cuts for each knife. And I've only had three that were eliminated. And I just knocked some serious shit onto the floor, so that's fun. All right, so these are the three knives that are eliminated. Now, remember, if you are keeping up with the test and the things that I've been doing, there is D2, but then there's also three other steels in mini griptilians, because we have the D2 mini griptilian involved here. And just as a control, I've been using a 440C mini griptilian, an M4 mini griptilian, and a 154CM mini griptilian. And we'll talk about all these knives in just a minute, but these are the three that have been eliminated from the competition. We have the Poka Ki-Han in D2, and then this, a lot of people call it a ZT0460 clone, but it's actually a copy of the Sinkovich Shiro custom that I guess eventually the 460 was based off of. So this is a copy of that. This one was the one that I was the most interested in because, you know, it says D2, but you don't know where this knife comes from or who manufactured it. So is it really D2? So these two knives in D2 have been eliminated, and so has the mini Griptilian in 440C. Now let me talk about those real quickly, though. So the Ki-Han, if you want to look again at the inclusive angle, just to, if that is what's interesting to you, the Ki-Han just was never quite on par with initial sharpness as the other knives were. I mean, it performed in the first couple rounds pretty well, but I sort of had the feeling early on that this was just not going to hold up. And it didn't. It was the first thing to go, the first knife overall to go. It just struggled getting through cardboard eventually, struggled with rope, and yeah, just didn't perform on the level of the other knives. Now, let me tell you, at this point, with the amount of media that this knife has cut, I still would 100% recommend it. You know, saying that it's the first thing eliminated, that in no way means it isn't good. I mean, the amount of cutting that this knife got done before it started to dull is still more than anyone would ever need for an EDC capacity. You know, so it still performed pretty well. And even though I'm a little bit disappointed because I really, really like this model, I'm still, you know, happy overall with this knife and the way that it performed. It's just not on the level of the other knives. Again, think about the number of variables that could have impacted why that happened. There's too many to even go through. The copy here is an interesting one in that I struggled with it at the beginning just because of like the upswept blade, just getting a feel for it. But then it started to perform really well, and I liked using it, and it stayed sharp a lot longer than I expected it to. So again, one of my things that I was sort of looking for was maybe this thing to crap out really early, and it didn't happen. You know, it seemed to retain pretty well, and it did, you know, just as I favored a certain part of the edge, it did start to dull on that part, but then as I adjusted the way that I cut, it kept going. One thing that I want to bring to your attention here, and you can probably see, we have a nice mirror on this edge right here, and I wanted to bring this up in the last video because just because you see people like posting pictures or videos with a really nice mirror edge, it doesn't necessarily mean the blade is sharp. You know, I learned that the hard way once, where I shipped a couple knives out to a like custom sharpener and got them back, and they had these beautiful mirror edges on them, and they weren't sharp. So even though this knife is you know, really still good looking at the edge, it is not sharp and it is not performing. So yeah, just something to keep in mind, that looks certainly are not everything when it comes to the way an edge performs. Now, the last thing of these three is the 440C Mini Griptilian. And even though this knife is eliminated, it has impressed me so much. And I don't know if Benchmade has a better heat treat on their 440C than other places, but if other companies, and if 440C in general performs on this level versus some of the other, you know, knives that we've seen, then I don't see why this isn't a steal that more people can get behind for higher end knives, because this thing was great. It was excellent. It had the, you can see, it had the highest inclusive angle, which generally speaking, I would think that for a lower end steel, you might want that for longer retention. But when you're looking at the way these mini grips perform next to each other, I'll tell you this right now. The steel, for EDC purposes, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you're getting a Mini Griptilian and you have a nice sharpened edge on it, M4, D2, 154cm, 440C, you've got a good knife. You've got a good knife with good value. And I mean, I don't know how much longer the edges are going to last on these three. I'll talk a little bit more about them in just a second. But the 440C, I mean, it kept up for a long time. kept up for a long time, and I was just really impressed with it. And I remember a while back, one of my early videos was the 154cm mini grip here versus the 440C mini Presidio, which I still have, and I really like that knife. And it's one of those knives that, like, the Ultra version, which is like the budget version, just doesn't get enough credit. And I said that I prefer the 440C mini Presidio just because I liked that knife more. And a lot of people disagreed with me because they didn't like the steel. But guys, I gotta do something like this. Do a test like this and just see how that stuff goes versus any other kind of steel. And I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not worth it to invest in something nicer depending on the model, but if you have the same model, the same design, if you can save a few bucks, I mean, you're getting a good knife when you get this right here. All right, so that's my piece about the 440C. About the rest of it, honestly, I haven't really noticed any difference in performance between the three of these. I'd say at this point right now, the best edges left on the knives belong to, they're all pretty comparable. The M4 sort of lost its initial razor super duper perfectly sharpness quality. It probably lost it first, but it's kept that second level longer. Whereas I can see that the 154cm is finally starting to wear down a little bit. The D2 is going strong. So, I mean, right now would be like 1, 2, 3. But for a long time, I mean, this was just performing better than the other two. It was just slicing really easily. And, again, if we're looking at inclusive angles, those Griptilians have really, really similar ones. So a pretty good control there, and again, just really goes to show that the mini grip overall is just a pretty good knife. Let's talk about the last few though. In D2, we have the TwoSun, the Rat 1, the Modus, and the Brous Bionic. So all of these knives, and right up there with the mini grip, I mean, these ones are all just performing lights out. Of the 4 of these knives, the one that's performing the best, hands down at this point, is the Rat 1. The Rat 1's killing it. I mean, the Rat 1 just goes. The steel will, throughout a lot of the tests, was just like gliding through stuff like butter. The Brous 2, the TwoSun, at some points has performed really, really well. One thing about this knife, and this isn't about the steel, this is just about the knife itself, just in use, I guess this thing wasn't Loctited, but I mean, I just developed a ton of play over the course of using this, and I had to tighten the pivot screw a couple times, but I mean, that's just still an excessive amount of use that you wouldn't really come across too much on a day-to-day basis, so not that huge of a deal. But yeah, all 4 of these knives are still in the competition. They're still going really strong. Initially, through the first few rounds, the steel will was like head and shoulders above everything. And then just recently, through the past few like testing rounds, I've noticed at the end that the Rat 1 and the Brous blades have sort of caught up to it, and the Rat 1 has like pulled ahead pretty firmly for now. But again, as these things go, so many variables, but also so many, different ways that things can wear at different paces. So yeah, that's really the analysis that I wanted to give you today. Just my take on everything, and just making clear that even though none of these results are conclusive, that what we have is what I think is a good steel. I do think that all of these knives that said they were D2, I think they're D2 or something close to as good. Even this one, which did peter out before most of the other D2 and seems a little bit suspect when it comes to the manufacturing. If it's not D2, it's something that still works, and if you get the right edge on it, I mean, this for EDC purposes would be just fine. Whether it's a clone or fake or a copy or a counterfeit, that's a debate for another day. But just in terms of use, I mean, this knife could serve you well. and, you know, will perform in EDC tasks. And that's really what the point of this all was. So, you know, if we're going to continue with this, like I said, I will, again, just understand that at the end of this, we have a bunch of really good knives with good materials, and it's going to all come down to preference, because just the way that they cut, it's good for every single one of them. All right, guys. So, like I said, I'll follow up. I'll keep putting a little bit of time in until we eventually have one final winner. But thanks very much for your patience with this whole video. Any other questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, let me know down below. Check out Jeff Jewell if you haven't already. I will link to him. And yeah, thanks a lot. Have a good one.